G'day, everybody. How's it going out there? This episode's going to get probably a little bit philosophical. And it's sort of in response to a PR sort of blunder that happened from a convention called Anthro Northwest. So on June 9th, there was a letter that was published by Anthro Northwest. And it had a big theme around what they would later call cancel culture, but they would never use that term within the letter. Instead, would utilize things such as judgment. So today I wanted to go over that letter and then go over some ideas about judgment and how you as an individual can deal with these kind of things in the modern era, because I think it is an important topic to discuss, even if the Anthro Northwest didn't bring it across in the most poignant of ways. Also, like, Anthro Northwest has used its judgment harshly in certain circumstances. I did a whole article on that, but I won't cover the details of that. I'll just touch on it and then move forward. But first, we'll read the whole letter, right? In its glory, and I'll try to not interject too much and just read it as it lies. But you know, the way it's written will probably have you feeling sort of what the kids would call cringe. But here we go. So here's the letter in its entirety. So Anthro Northwest, on judging others and redemption. To maintain a safe, welcome, inclusive, kind, relaxed, and positive environment is foundational to any healthy community, especially those founded on the basis of promoting creativity, clarity, and hospitality. Starting with a run-on sentence. Take a breath. There do exist people who are dangerous to the welfare and safety of our society. This letter is not about them. Rather, this letter addresses both those who are falsely accused and those who have, with all sincerity, turned from their past and live a good life. There's some tense changing here, too. Like, to live a good life. Damn it, editor, stop. Just keep reading. As members of a community united together in a common bond of love and beauty, we should be mindful as to how our actions and communication affects those around us. Indeed. We see through a glass darkly. Our reality, especially with the influence of social media, unfortunately abounds with doctored images, false narratives, innuendo, guilt by association, and slander. Even when there is a partial truth to such things, how do we know the circumstances of someone's life? How do we know their intentions? How do we know their heart and purpose? How do we know their suffering? How do we know their truth? We often remain paralyzed with the brightest lights in our midst rereading that. I did say the wrong word there. We often remain paralyzed while the brightest lights in our midst are torn down and snuffed out. The old contest of elevating oneself above another by tearing down someone is repeated before us daily. This is an illusion. We do not lift ourselves up. You could have just left it at "this is an illusion" and didn't need to repeat that. Anyways, critique. Back to the reading. We fall lower with all of humanity as even the least of us is shattered before our eyes. What the hell does that mean? In this digital world, often one word wrongly spoken, one misdeed done, this is what is immortalized. We can choose to have such energies live on forever. We live in a world where with just a few clicks of a button, we can instigate hatred, contempt, shame, ridicule, and abuse on our fellow members. We deprive them of the benefit of public confidence and social interaction. How would our community be different if the best in all of our fellow humans was what filled our minds? It is grievous enough to highlight past mistakes of another, but how terrible is it to label and judge the whole life of a person? Who are we to reduce another human to a label? Who has not erred? Who has not spoken a wrongful word? Who has not hurt others? Who is not guilty of a wrong decision? Who here understands the circumstances of another's life? See, I kind of made that sentence better accidentally. Who understands the silent internal sufferings and struggles of another's heart? I mean, not all of these questions are created equal. Hurting others is different than making a mistake, is different than a person's circumstances. But, as I said, not going to psychoanalyze quite yet. We're just going to keep going. How long should a person be required to live right and do good before we as a community allow them to redeem themselves? How long, as a community, should we focus on the past faults and mistakes of others rather than who they are today, their present and future? How long is it until we deign to allow someone to put their past behind them? Now is the time to honor a new path taken. We've taken a new path, or are we supposed to, there's a tense conflict there. It's like, now is the time to forge a new path. Or even now is the time to, forge a new honorable path. There's different ways to say it. Anyways, again, now is the time to honor a new path taken. Now is the time to honor sincerity. Now is the time to acknowledge positive change. Now is the time to honor the good in others. Now is the time for beauty. Now is the time for love, as a community built by love to love. Let us be grateful for and acknowledge the good in our fellow members. Let us work to further the best in each other. To everything turn, turn, turn. Anyway. So this obviously was an interesting piece, and the reason that it was kind of seen as a weird flub, I'll have to note, it was signed by Gabriel Felix, who is the chair of or founder of Anthro Northwest, and it's dated as June 3rd, but it was published on the 9th. So I think there was a little bit of a contention or some probably some of the staff were like, are we really going to post this on social media? And then Gabriel was like, yes, do it. And they ended up removing it. So the reason I wanted to make a video or talk about this is because it is a complicated subject, judgment. And the reason it's a complicated subject matter, and the reason that it is something that you're not going to solve being the chair of a convention or even being in a leadership role in the government, is because judgment is I would say the last bastion of humanity that we don't really have control over. And the reality is that we don't have control over other people's judgment, and we honestly really shouldn't. And there's some calls in that letter for saying, as a community, people who make judgments about other people are typically making it on their own. And sometimes some people who are well-spoken and charismatic can influence the decisions of other people in the community. But as charismatic as somebody is, everybody has their limits. Social networks have their limits, especially in the internet age. Though, you can have tribalism and things like that, there's only so much positions that people can do in the real world based on certain ideology when you have to interact with people in the world who do multiple tasks, who without them we couldn't do the things that we do in an efficient manner. society relies on many different kinds of people with many different ideals and many different ideals. It is, but the reality is that humans also get worried about judgment. They fear judgment. It's the one thing that they don't have full control over, is how other people will judge them. And it can be stifling to people, indeed. It's always been a thing, before the internet even. And so how do you deal with judgment, I guess, is the big question. Well, you have to be careful about, as an institution, saying that we should limit our ability to make judgments. Because, as it came to find out, and you'll see that in the article that I wrote below, is that, the convention has made some judgments and some expedient judges themselves. There is a nearby convention to Anthro Northwest called Furlandia, which is named after Portlandia, which is like an eccentric movie about Portland, Oregon. But Furlandia is a convention that takes place in Portland, Oregon. And they, one of the staff members of Furlandia, back in 2019, informed me that they had been removed, or were, I should say, they had been subjected to a ban of going to Anthro Northwest. And the article goes into that a little bit more. I don't want to use the video to go over that because there's some evidences and things like that. And I think it's much more poignant to go read the article about that particular situation. But at the end of the day, what I'm saying here is that Anthro Northwest, who here has not aired, well, the person you banned might have made some weird jokes online that caused you to think of them as a security issue, even though they were kind of just jokes. And to be fair, a little fair to Anthro Northwest, they did ask the Safi who is the person who was banned, to present their case, and Safi decided it's not worth it because Anthro Northwest's culture or dynamic of what they run the convention for kind of mismatches with what he likes to go to conventions for anyway. So he didn't really appeal. He didn't really conflict against it. But I think he felt that it was in haste, and even if he didn't want to choose to fight the go-to trial, as it were, that they were being hasty about it, especially since they confronted him about not being able to go and to appeal to the board without him even even putting in any interest in going to the convention. Right? It's as if they did it preemptively for some weird reason. Now, who can say, right? But is that my business? And originally, I decided no, it wasn't. It was a convention was choosing to ban another furry. And if this other furry that they chose to ban wasn't Safi, wasn't a person who was on a board member on another furry convention, would I have written an article? Would I have talked about it? No. So I felt it was like, in my judgment, it's like maybe Anthro Northwest had a reason. Maybe they felt that they had a compelling reason not to do it. That they, even though they made a quick judgment, that that's their right to do that. Even if Safi was angry about that judgment at first and felt that door slammed in their face and felt it the way that they did it was insulting. And there I had no but at the end of the day, it's an interpersonal dispute that, as interesting as it is seeing a board member banned from an active board member, by the way, not a person who is demeaned and thrown off the board, but an actual active board member of one convention being banned from another convention, is an interesting news story. But at the time, it was maybe the weight of the judgment of Anthro Northwest exceeds the frustration that Safi felt about the situation, especially since they didn't like that style of convention anyway. But then somebody used their judgment on Anthro Northwest to publish this letter, which criticizes using judgment too quickly and too hastily and using it to limit others and do that certain things. So because of that judgment, I recanted my previous judgment on not sharing that story about Safi's banning. And I wrote that part in the article. And so, it is what it is. We all make judgments, right? Judgment is the thing that we all have. What we choose to share, what we choose not to share, what we feel is prudent, what we feel is not prudent. It's all a judgment, which is, I think, one of the strengths of social media is that what people choose to focus on and get frustrated about may not be the things that news people in the past understood that people were frustrated about, right? Back when information was more curated to like small, local news television, right? People's ideas of what they would like to see society were, for better or worse, curated into a smaller platform, right? Now, anyone can share any thoughts and feelings and let that lie. Now, because of that, you're going to have people who are going to dislike you for what you do and say, and like you for what you do and say. And the reality is that is, in essence, a judgment. If someone follows you, if someone blocks you, those are both judgments. But people remember and people feel more, scared or worried or anxious about negative judgment than positive judgment, right? Positive judgment just becomes something that just happens, and negative judgment becomes cancel culture, a buzzword that sort of highlights the anxiety of being concerned about negative judgments of others. But the reality is that if you truly are a good person, and if you truly do live by an operative moralis, like you have a foundation morality, the thing that you can do is keep doing the best that you can do with what you have. Make your mistakes, but understand those mistakes and learn from those mistakes. Even if that mistake you made may have burned a bridge or two. There's a difference between seeing that you burned a bridge and then going around and trying to make it look like the other person was at fault, or using DARVO techniques, DARVO. You can look those up. Basically, deny, attack, and then victim, what was it called? Reverse victim and offender, basically. So basically, if you do something wrong and then you flip it around. I think the best video that I have to kind of go over that when you have done a mistake or when you have made a mistake, to try to make, reverse your course for yourself and try to do better. I think my worst work was when For Affinity United closed. And basically, my methods did harm to Dragoneer. And I did address that in a video where, how do you look and see if you make a judgment if you're in the wrong? Because the thing is that everybody has a self-bias. And that, by the way, is a judgment, right? Everybody has a self-bias. When Gabriel wrote this letter, I'm sure he thought it was the best written thing since sliced bread, and that he was going to put it out there, and that all of a sudden everybody in the fandom would be like, you know what? Yeah, I should forgive that other person. But instead, what happened when he had published this thing under the Anthro Northwest social media account, there was two kinds of reactions. Number one was, oh my gosh, what did Anthro Northwest do to require them to write what basically felt like a defensive blog letter, right? So people's judgment about his letter about judgment was that he was trying to say, hey, we got to be more forgiving, right? We got to be more forgiving, right? And people's things like, well, what did you do, right? So that was people's judgment of his letter about judgment. And then the second kind of response was from a lot of fandom institutions was to sort of make light of it. And then there's a link in the article about that one. Furry Down Under was like, hey, yo, we all say something, yo, mites, and like, crip on the bobby and stuff. Like, basically, they wrote a rambling, like, Australian neologism letter that just was like, to Rothwell. Like, it was funny. I loved it. And that was the one I used as a reference, but other institutions did it as well. Most of the letters didn't really say anything or used weird words and weird patterns, similar to the original inspiring letter by Anthro Northwest. So it was basically a PR blunder. But who here has not erred, as it were, right? So they made a mistake. And, Anthro Northwest is a growing convention. It has been growing for some time, and it's hard to do that, especially in the shadow of Rainforest. So I do hope that their convention continues to grow and do that and share and allow other people to share joy with others. Even if the PR error was kind of weird. And the fact that, I had to point, because here's the thing. Anthro Northwest may take it personally that I decided to write that particular thing. And maybe some people on staff feel it's apples and oranges because, well, an organization has the right for security, but there wasn't really any evidence that they presented to Safi that he was a security threat, right? Or anything like that. It was more guilt by association kind of stuff and other things like that. And that there's even a comment section in the comment section of the article. You can kind of see that back and forth. But at the end of the day, when it comes to judgment, it is. I'll note this kind of thing. Human beings are not great at it, and I think if you're looking for an example, it's the reason that social deception games work, such as Among Us, right? We think that we're an excellent judge of character and that we have all the information and that we'd be able to make a good judgment when push comes to shove. But when you're forced to take a vote and the guy's good at lying about this other guy being suspicious and, being deceptive, and basically it's easy to turn the tables and things like that. Even in a democracy where you're voting like who's the imposter that we're going to throw out this round, you can make, it's the whole game only works because people can make mistakes based on a charismatic person making statements, right? Saying non-true things to deceive people. And unfortunately, some people who fear judgment, I think, try to make false equivalences, try to make other people's wrongs. They use that Darbo technique, right? Deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. They use those techniques in order to, affect other people's judgment. But if you are truly a good person, you should just keep being a good person. That's how you do it, right? The time will fade eventually. And the reality is that if a person, and this is why I have to be careful as a person who does nonfiction in the furry fandom about allowing too much negativity and too much negative thoughts and processes to get involved in the news, is because there are good furries who do good things, and those things should be promoted. And also there are bad furries who do bad things, and furries should be aware of that. But how do you strike that fair balance or attempt at balance at those things? Sometimes good furries may make an error. Sometimes bad furries may do one or two good things every once in a while, right? The world is complicated like that. And at the end of the day, if you're worried about the judgment of others, then I'll leave you with this bit of wisdom that I kind of came up with about a year or two ago, when I finally had shed that childish ideal that you are going to that you can make peace or be friends with or befriend everyone, kind of that false ideal, right? And I shed that a while ago, but I actually put words to it a few years ago, and that is this phrase: you were born with a group of people who love you unconditionally. And not unconditionally, but you were born with a group of people who loved you dearly. And you were born with a group of people who hated your very existence. That is true. Your color, your race, what area you grew up in, what your parents' wealth or lack of wealth was, what country you're born in. That impacts people's view on who you are as a person. And you were born with people who loved you and people who hated you right when you came out of the womb, no matter how you came out of the womb. You're going to die with a group of people who love you and a group of people who hate you, and probably a whole lot of people who don't even know who you are, right? You're going to live and die with people who love you and hate you. And it doesn't matter what you do in your life. The size of the groups may fluctuate, but the reality is that's the truth. Heck, frickin' even the most infamous people from back in the 40s have a frickin' fan club still somehow. Please don't. But, this is the whole thing. Life is merely the changing of who that group of people is. That's all it is. The changes of who loves you and who doesn't like you, right? Who loves you and who hates you. The changes in those people, in those groups, those change throughout your life, and they will. So if you are worried, and it is a tough thing to do, to not worry about those kind of things, I would say just keep being you unconditionally, and you'll find people who love you. So, but be aware that other people are also anxious about how you view them, and try to do your best to put them at peace, and try not to make them too anxious. It's one of those things where if you don't judge people as harshly, people are going to be less harsh in judging you. It's always a reciprocal thing. But there are going to be people who need to make snap judgments because that's how they learned how to grow up. And the difference in how people judge other people, that's up to them. You can't control that, and you shouldn't have the power to control that. I would argue that at the end of the day, too, we need to make sure our systems understand that human judgment is a very powerful thing. It's the reason that we have a judicial system, a jury of a peer system, a grand jury, a trial jury, and things like that. We have systems of checks and balances to ensure that our powerful institutions can have that sort of thing. And that's another reason I felt like I needed to write that letter. Because the more institutional power you have, the more I feel the less you should have the freedom to disassociate or associate with individuals, right? A furry convention is not all the way up here in my mind. That's like a government. Like the United States government should not have the power to basically de-citizenize somebody just on the whim of one person, right? There should be due process in that. Same with due process in charging somebody with a crime, etc. So you need systems of checks and balances as institutional power increases, because you need to have checks and balances to make sure that the government isn't just disassociating people just because they don't like a person. They have to have actually committed a wrong or a crime. But down at the individual level, if you are an individual, you should have the more power and freedom to associate and disassociate with whom you like, in my mind. And that's why I felt that it was that article was worth writing. Because here we have an institution writing a letter about telling individuals, preaching to individuals about how they, as individuals, should judge other people. But while that institution is using its freedom to make judgments on its own, right? And if that institution is allowed to critique us on how we judge, then we as individuals have the right to judge that institution on how it judges. And one of my comments basically said, the whole premise of this idea is you should practice what you preach if you choose to preach, and you should preach what you practice if you choose to practice. Anyways, what do you guys think about judgment and anything like that? Thank you very much for watching this video. Please kick that like, kick the subscribe button, and kick a comment in the comment section. Feel free to read that article in the description below, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you very much.